To the Moon is a truly beautiful game. From its stylized and pixelated art style to the wonderful soundtrack and the characters within the game. Most importantly, however, is the story. There have only been two games that have brought me to tears. One was this game, and the other was Before Your Eyes, which, if you haven't seen, I did a previous video on that game as well. To the Moon was a game on my to play list for quite some time. I heard good things, I saw good reviews, but for some reason I always put it off. But once I did get around to playing it, however, it quickly became one of the most impactful games I've ever played. This video will break down the game a little bit, and I'll have my thoughts and feelings interspersed throughout. So spoilers ahead, but if that's okay, I hope you enjoy. The game starts off with a car crash. It's minor and no one's injured, but we're introduced to two of our characters, Dr. Rosalene and Dr. Watts. The pair grab their equipment from their car and make their way to a nearby house. The gameplay here is mostly traversing the areas, looking for objects to interact with or characters to talk to. Initially, I was impressed with the soundtrack and the retro feel of the game, but I'll be honest, I was a little worried that I wouldn't end up liking it. Just the old style of point and click with lots of text sort of put me off, but I'm so very glad that I ended up playing through it. Once you reach the house, you're introduced to another group of characters. It's the family that we're here to help. And then we go into Act 1. Beautiful music plays. It's actually really delightful and sets a cheerful mood. Throughout the game, I was pleasantly surprised at the characters' interactions. It was joyful, sometimes very cringy, but the humor does often land as well. It really felt like an homage to many retro point-and-click adventures. We move upstairs and we meet our patient, Johnny. Johnny is very clearly ill, and it's implied that he doesn't have much time left. Attended at bedside by his doctor, we approach him. He's unconscious, and the doctor tells us he doesn't know how much time Johnny has left to live, but he seems to be hanging on for something, and that's what we're here to help with. We set up our equipment and we get ready for our procedure. We don't quite know what it does yet, but I was willing to find out. What we end up doing for our patients is that we can enter their mind and provide them with an experience or one last wish to fulfill one dream they had. And Johnny's last wish was to go to the moon. The helpers and family here can't really tell us much else because Johnny was a quiet man and he didn't really share much with them. All they know is that he was a craftsman and his wife passed away 2 years ago. At this point of the game, I was beginning to get intrigued. This isn't some silly little game with quirky humor. It was a game about giving a dying man one final wish. We get a heart monitor that can be accessed by the menu that provides some information on how Johnny is doing. This will be important later on. I know I've mentioned it a few times, but the music in this game really is something to behold. It often switches from fast and quirky to slow and dramatic, depending on the mood of the game at the time. It truly is beautiful. Sometimes I'll actually listen to this soundtrack outside of the game just to remind myself how beautiful it really is. After some exploring around the house, we eventually begin our procedure, but there's a lot to find in the house if you care to explore. We eventually go in the basement and we find a room that's completely full with paper rabbits. We don't really know why the rabbits are important, but the helpers tell us that Johnny never let anyone go into the basement and that the rabbits were very special to him. He even has many more of them in a lighthouse nearby. More on this later, but keep the paper rabbits in mind. After some exploring, we end up initiating our procedure. We explain that we're unable to actually create new memories, but instead we travel through the patient's old memories to as early as possible and sort of instill the idea of his wish to go to the moon. And the machine we brought will help him with his desire to relive his life following that wish. We're going to help Johnny reach the moon. This idea is where I knew I would love this game. The idea of rewinding time, even if superficially, and experiencing something we always wished we could. This was something that hits hard with me. Life is full of regrets and rarely ever goes according to plan, but imagine that we could simulate these experiences to simulate childhood dreams that may have been lost to time. I was ready to find out more. We initiate the procedure and we're teleported into the mind of Johnny and find him sitting out by the cliffside watching the waves roll in. He's sitting near a lighthouse. We introduce ourselves and he's aware of our agency and what we do, but he's unaware that he's actually in the dream at first, but he does come around quickly. It's a sad moment where he looks over to the woman standing next to him, and as he tries to address her, she fades away. This is his last accessible memory before he fell unconscious. He asks us if we're here to take him to the moon, and we tell him that we are. He says, "I suppose I had a good run." He understands his fate, his situation, and asks us if we're able to take him to the moon. However, when we ask why he wants to go there, he says he's not really sure. We try to pry further, and it's clear that Johnny can't remember why he wants to go there, only that he does. As his last dying wish, he wants to go to the moon. We tell him that we aren't able to go straight back to his childhood and that we need to go back in sections, and that once we reach his childhood, we'll influence him to become an astronaut, which would fulfill his wish. We ask about a memento, something that means something to him, and he does give us one. It's a little toy moon, and these mementos will allow us to jump back through his memories. And we do. We go back in time. We see Johnny sitting at a piano playing yet another beautiful piece of music in a house full of paper rabbits. These obviously mean something to him, and there's symbolism here, but we just don't yet understand. We find another memento in his memory that allows us to go back further, and our next memory we jump back to is Johnny sitting alone in the rain under an umbrella. He's sitting by the lighthouse staring off into the distance. This area seems really special to him. This must be a place of comfort for him, but I wonder why. Johnny at this point is unable to see our two doctors. He's living in the memories as they happened, and he says out loud, "It's finished, River. Like you, I'll be able to watch over her every day. She won't be alone anymore." He says he stayed true to River's wish, and that when he's gone, who will watch over her? We don't really know the her he's talking about, but it seems very sad and somber. We actually uncloak ourselves in this memory and speak to him. We ask him about River, and he says she didn't have to do it, and that he doesn't understand why she did. This is a sad moment. A grieving man sitting in the rain speaking to his lost soulmate. This game was much more than a quirky little retro point-and-click adventure. It was something special. We travel back further and find Johnny standing beside a bed that has River in it. He says to her that once they pay for her surgery, they'll have enough left over for it. And River calls this a white lie. River was sick, and we do know that she died. We are traveling backwards and seeing how it all unfolded. But River says she looked at her finances and asks why we're trying to force her to do something against her will. We tell her we need money for her medical bills, but she says it's too much. She asks us if we know what makes her happy, and we struggle to answer. River says that she knows what makes her happy, and she asks if we would honor her wishes. When the papers come for her treatment, she says she won't sign them. She wants us to use the money to finish building that house, she says. And she tells us that for every day we live there, she wants us to watch over her. There were clearly pieces of the puzzle missing here, but I so desperately wanted to know more. She tells us to visit her, to speak to her, and that she doesn't want her to be alone. We ask, "What about you?" and River responds tragically with, "I'll be happy." River hands us something she made. It's a paper rabbit, like all the other ones she made, so River was actually the one making the rabbits out of paper. She asks us to describe it. We describe its belly, its ears, its feet, and this will actually be important later on. Remember that. She was making so many of them, and Johnny kept every single one. He cherished them. These small mementos in this game can reflect real life. When we lose someone or something we love, it's often the little things that remind us of them. Small things that make us hear their voices or see their faces, and bring them back to us even for a moment. Johnny then plays River a song on the piano. The piano which he actually moved into the bedroom so River could hear the song properly, and I was already crushed. This game was going to break me, and I knew it. I just didn't know how badly. During the game, River mentions someone named Anya, and we don't really know who that is. So our two characters ask about Anya, the person they were referencing about not being alone, and who we are supposed to take care of when River passes. Why haven't we seen them in any memories? And why were they so important? We do find more mementos, and we move back further in time. We see Johnny and River's house, except it's only in the early stages of being built. This was their dream home on a cliffside, beside the lighthouse, overlooking the vast body of water where they would spend the rest of their days together. Johnny's talking to a friend and says that River's illness was caught early, but that her medical bills are just too expensive. They won't be able to finish building the house, and they can barely even cover her bills in general. He says River's going to be heartbroken. Johnny says that he'll actually tell River that they can afford to do both, that he's going to lie to her. He says that if he told her the truth, he's not sure which one she would choose, the house or her treatment. And he couldn't live with that. He couldn't live without her. He tells his friend that he's not going to let River die and that he can't be alone. Then we go back in time again, and we see Johnny and River talking to friends in a bar. They say the house is beginning construction soon and they're excited for it to be done. They call it their dream house. We find out that they actually had their wedding at the lighthouse years ago. So this place, this land, this home is very special to them. It's no wonder why Johnny thought River might choose the house over her treatment. Their lives have so many ties to this area. River leaves the table and only Johnny and his friend are left, and he says that ever since the incident, River has been making paper rabbits over and over again, day in and day out. Apparently it's a trait with her condition, but Johnny says he has a bad feeling about it, and that often River just feels distant. This backwards storytelling was very interesting to me. We already knew the outcome, but seeing the story play out backwards was a very unique way of telling it. It slowly unfolded in front of me, and I really began to care about these characters. I wanted to know the whole story, and I really wanted to see the whole picture. Further in time, we see Johnny and River at the lighthouse, the one behind their future house. River says, "Why would they abandon her like this?" Johnny says that perhaps it's no longer needed. The lighthouse has become obsolete. This place means a lot to both of them, and Johnny tells River that if they save some money, in a few years they could buy the property beside the lighthouse and that they'll always be able to see it from their windows, and that they can visit her, and that the lighthouse will never be alone again. This was the promise that Johnny made. This place was so special to them, it had history with them, and they did everything they could to cherish this lighthouse, a symbol for their love. Johnny and River seemed very happy, and I'm glad they got to build their house there, right behind the lighthouse. Right behind Anya. This means that River was foregoing her treatment for the house and the lighthouse. She didn't want Anya to be alone. She was so worried that this moment in their lives would be forgotten that she would rather die than move away. Move away from everything she loved. She was okay with dying, knowing that Johnny would be there to take care of their special place in her absence. We go back in time again, and we see Johnny talking to River. She's making a paper rabbit. They're everywhere. What is the significance of these rabbits? I really had to know, but we had to go further back to find out. And we do. We see a much younger Johnny and Rivers sitting on a bench below the lighthouse many years back. They're talking about their first meeting, and Johnny says, "I shouldn't have tainted our first meeting like that." What did he mean by this? We go further back again, and Johnny's talking to his friend, and he mentions Rivers' syndrome, and that every case is different. Izzy also has this condition, and Johnny says that River is becoming much more distant and more spaced out. She's not acting like herself. We saw this in the future a bit, where she was very aloof and all she did was make paper rabbits for Johnny. But I had to know more, and we had to go further back. We go to their wedding night. They're sitting outside the lighthouse and discuss if they feel any different, and River says it's just a set of rings, but Johnny says he does feel different. Next, River asks if they could name the lighthouse Anya, and Johnny agrees. This is where she got her name. They named her on their wedding night, and this is just another reason that Anya is so important to them. They shared a special moment here together. Johnny and River ascend the lighthouse and end up spending the entire night inside of it together. They slept overnight at the top of the lighthouse overlooking the water. Next, we see their actual wedding. As they say their vows and give their I do's, they seal it with a kiss. We're seeing a beautiful story about a couple who grew old together, but not quite old enough. Johnny lost his wife, and for 2 years he had to live alone to keep Anya company. As we progress back in time, it's sort of a happy and sad feeling, knowing where it all ends, but learning where it comes from. This really drives home that life is about the journey more so than the destination. I've touched on the subject a few times, but I truly believe it. We often forget to live in the moment and give attention to the small moments that end up meaning the most. What seemed trivial at the time ends up being a lifelong memory that you hold close to your heart. We were experiencing that in this game between these two characters. This game was telling a story through their memories, and it does so very well. Further back in time, we see Johnny and River come across a dead rabbit in the road. River is upset, and Johnny tells her that they're late and there's nothing they can do. Was this the rabbit that started the paper rabbits? But why did it mean so much to her? There had to be something else. There had to be more to this. There's a cute little section in the past where you get to ride some horses around and River and Johnny ride together. These smaller moments really add to the world building. Not every moment is extremely significant to the story, and we're just seeing their lives, seeing their happiest moments, and as I said before, sometimes they can be small ones. We never know what is truly important until it's past us and we look back. We go further back and reach the first time River was diagnosed with her condition. The doctor lends us some books and recommends further professionals to help with what's to come, but we both say we're fine and that we can handle it. We go back again. Johnny is much younger. He's just a kid. We get a funny little moment where Johnny thought River stood him up on a movie date, but River was actually inside the theater the whole time, just sitting in a different seat away from Johnny. And when Johnny leaves, River leaves too and approaches him. And she asks, if we were watching the movie in the same room, what does it matter where I was sitting? I thought this was silly, but kind of fitting for the story. This, in all honesty, is so silly, but the heartfelt moment comes afterwards. Neither of them are mad. They laugh it off and actually ask each other to go back in and continue watching the movie. These two really understood each other. We go back again to an older memory and we see someone trying to coax Johnny into doing something he's very nervous about. He's trying to build up the courage to ask River out on a date. This must be the first time he asked her out, and after some back and forth, he decides to do it. Johnny says hello, and you can tell he's very nervous. But River seems pretty dismissive. She's giving one-word answers and refusing to look up from her book. And beside her is a stuffed platypus, which throughout the game we can often see her with the same one, and this will be important later on. It's actually very cute how awkward it is, and had me smiling from ear to ear. She says she's reading about lighthouses, and begins to talk about them briefly, but it quickly folds into silence. Johnny eventually asks her if she wants to see a movie, and River says she doesn't know if she does. Johnny says he will give her some time to think about it and gives her a date and time. River sits silently for a bit and then just says yes. This was the first time he asked her out. When they agreed to go to the movie from earlier on in the video, it's funny how the first date turned out. That Johnny thought she stood him up, but River just awkwardly sat away from him, failing to understand the concept of the date. But they could both laugh it off, and from then on, they were inseparable, as we've seen. We go back a bit, and Johnny's talking to a friend, Nicholas. They're talking about River. Nicholas says she's boring and uninteresting, and all she does is sit by herself silently. Johnny, however, calls her unique, and he sees something that Nicholas doesn't. It seems like it was love at first sight. Johnny and Nicholas do have a weird conversation, though, about how Johnny wanted to be with River because she was strange and shy, and Nicholas says, you want her for what she has, but not her. I'm going to be honest, and I didn't really completely understand this, but what I got from it is that he picked her out because of her traits she had, before getting to even know who she actually was. This was referenced earlier when he confessed and apologized for their first meeting. I didn't really read too deeply into this, but I did figure it was worth mentioning. We try to go further back, but there's a malfunction. The memories aren't stitching together, and then we're transferred into Act 2. We, for some reason, couldn't go back to the beginning, but we do have a plan laid out. We just have to pass his future wishes into the past version of himself, back when he was a child. It may not have to be right at the beginning. We finish the task, we implant the idea, and we travel into his memories a little further on to see if it's stuck, and if our procedure was complete. As we check through the stages of his life, it seems like they're all the exact same. The implanting of the idea didn't work, which it usually does. Something was wrong. It should have changed. We come to the conclusion that Johnny may need some influence to have the idea spark inside of him at a younger age, instead of us just implanting it. We go through some memories and attempt to make changes, but nothing's working. There's a silly little sequence where one of our main characters actually pretends to be a member of NASA. It doesn't work. The machine is having no effect. We transferred his wish of going to the moon, but it just didn't stick. There must be something else. That something else must be River. She was so important to him that maybe she was the key to implanting this idea. She must have done something in the past to start the initial dream. The final wish that he had to go to the moon. A little later on, while taking a break from the procedure, the physician at bedside tells us that we don't have long, and that Johnny doesn't have much time left. We learned that a medication he was on as a kid could actually cause lapses in memory. But he shouldn't have been on these pills as a kid, and it was such a large dose. We have no idea why he took this, and it's actually the reason we can't go back to his earliest memories. He's forgotten them. But conveniently, we can tune the machine to get past this blockage, so the story can progress. Now we're in Act 3. There's a little section where they struggle to bypass the memory block, but it's not super important to the story, so I'm just going to skip ahead. We find ourselves further back in time, and after wandering through a little town, we see a child get hit by a car. It appears to be Johnny at first, but then Johnny comes into frame screaming Joey. Joey was Johnny's twin brother, and he just saw him get killed. What the hell is going on? We flash back to a memory of Johnny and Joey hanging out as kids together as brothers. I didn't really mention it earlier, but Johnny often mentions animorphs in his teenage phase, and I figured I'd bring it up here instead. Joey is actually the one who introduced him into the animorphs, and he continued on liking them even after Joey was killed and even after he forgot. This was another little memento that reminded him of someone he loved. Again, something that probably seemed small and insignificant turned out to be a lifelong reminder of his younger brother. These memories stuck around even after they were seemingly wiped from an overdose. He still latched onto that memento even if he didn't know why. We flash back and we're at a carnival. It's mostly just Joey and Johnny enjoying themselves as they traverse the carnival and play various games. But the day turns into evening, and the sun goes down. Johnny decides to venture off by himself away from the carnival. He travels through some trees and up onto a large cliff, one overlooking the waves rolling in, one which seems very familiar. He sits on a log and he's in awe of the view. Our main characters have some silly banter, but the moment here lies around Johnny. Then we hear some rustling in the bushes and out walks a young girl. They introduce themselves and you probably guessed, it's River. She tells Johnny that he's actually in her spot, and Johnny apologizes, but asks if she wants to join him. She questions if he's there to look at the stars, and he says he is. The two of them go and sit on the log together, taking in the sights and looking at the stars, and there's a beautiful cinematic moment between the two of them. The art style turns into more of a cartoon, but it fits really well. River says this is her spot during carnivals, and Johnny says he feels the same, that he doesn't like crowds and he just wanted to get away. Johnny does ask her name, and River is hesitant to tell him at first. She says kids make fun of her name, and she doesn't want to tell him. River says she would like to have a name that everyone else has, like John, and says that would be similar to how stars are. They might look the same from here, but that doesn't make them any less pretty. I found this to be beautiful and sad. River clearly has never really fit in, and she seems to long for acceptance or at least some kind of companionship. The conversation continues, and River asks if Johnny's ever made a rabbit out of the stars like a constellation. Johnny says he hasn't, but he would like to try. He wants to make the best constellation ever. River looks up at the sky and says she can see one. She says to think big. She's looking at the moon. Johnny eventually sees it, and River asks him to describe it, just like she asked him to describe the paper rabbits. He points out the ears and the feet and says the moon is its big round belly. River was asking us to describe the same thing in the future. Every time she talked about the paper rabbit she was making, she always asked us to describe each part. She was remembering this moment. It was coming together. The moon, the rabbits, the memories, it was all starting to unfold before me, and I wasn't ready for what was coming. Johnny asks what she thinks the stars are, and River says she always thought of them as lighthouses, that they can all see each other and want to talk to each other, but they can't. All they can do is shine their lights to the other lighthouses, and that's just what they do. They continue shining their light. She tells us that one day she's going to befriend one of them, and she did. She befriended Anya, the lighthouse where we built our house, where we got married, spent the night of our wedding inside of. This is why she was so fond of it. It was a childhood dream. She felt like a lighthouse in the sky, isolated and alone, shining her light in all directions, just wanting some connection. And then Johnny gets called away by his mother. He gives River a toy he won from the carnival. It's a toy platypus. This can actually be seen throughout the game in various areas. She kept it the whole time. She kept the memento. Before Johnny leaves, River asks him if he'll be here next year, and Johnny says he will be. Johnny says, same place, same time, and River agrees. But quickly she asks, what if you forget? Or get lost? What will we do then? And Johnny says, then we can regroup on the moon, silly. Right on the rabbit's tummy. I I I was speechless. He didn't want to be an astronaut or travel in space. He wanted his wife back. She got lost and he wanted to meet her where they always said they would, on the moon. This memory was long forgotten, but he always held on to it in his heart. River was the most important thing to him and he lost her. And all he wanted in his dying wish was to see her one more time. This brought me to tears. And as I'm recording this, I'm getting a little choked up again. It's honestly such a beautiful moment. However, my only complaint about this game is that immediately after this moment, there's some really bad jokes between the main characters about calling it a cheese fest and predictable, and I find some of this humor is really mistimed, but overall, the story and feelings I felt outweigh this minor negative. The rest of the game is a little strange, so I'm going to skip over most of it. To summarize, our characters say we're obligated to legally deliver Johnny to the moon. They have a duty. It was signed in their contract. But they argue whether or not to include River because with her in his life, he wouldn't be motivated to become an astronaut. There's some weird gameplay mechanics and puzzles here that I'm going to just gloss over. Again, it's not terrible or anything, but it just doesn't fit with the video and fit with the vibe of the game itself, to be honest. Our characters fight with each other. One wants to go through with the contract and ask the other to trust them, while the other is more inclined to go a different way. Eventually, they go through with the plan of removing River from the equation. They actually edited her out of their first date spot, and Johnny never gets to ask her out, meaning they were never together. This was a little strange to me too, but it does have a payoff, so stick with me. We are shown that the memories we previously visited are now changed. River's no longer in them, and Johnny never ended up with her. We travel through flashes of memories being changed and River being erased from them. Eventually, we're shown that Johnny did get a job with NASA. Their plan actually worked. He was going to become an astronaut. We get to explore the NASA base for a little while and skip ahead. We don't actually have much time left, and we have to get to the final memory link. We begin to hear a heartbeat, and we aren't really sure what's going on. Is he dying? Are we too late? But then the door opens to the break room, and in walks River. She walks over and introduces herself to Johnny. Our main character tells us that when she moved River from the first date spot, she was able to change her path inside Johnny's mind and put them on a path that would eventually intersect. At least she hoped. They got to meet after all. Knowing that we don't have much time left, we do skip ahead. There's a faint heartbeat in the background as we do, and we get flashes of memories that are being created on our way to the end of the journey. Johnny and River have grown close. They play piano together and appear to be bonding. It was all going according to plan. We are told tomorrow is the big day. We skip ahead, and we're actually waiting nearby for a NASA shuttle launch. We get to talk to some of the friends and people we've met throughout the game, but the important thing here is the launch itself. The shuttle begins to launch, and we get a cockpit view. As it climbs higher in the sky towards the moon, we see the shuttle's cockpit. We see Johnny and River sitting beside each other, and ever so gently, Johnny and River reach out and hold each other's hand. They did it. River was lost, and Johnny knew exactly where to find her, beside him, on his way to the moon. The last thing we hear are heartbeats from the monitor, followed by a flat line. They made it to the moon together. Thanks for watching.